All right, welcome to paraglidingtalk.com. I'm your host, Robert Michaels. So glad that you're here. We're joined tonight with a special guest, Revis Gray. He is an ex-sea pilot. He just recently broke some really big record in Oregon. He has a history of flying that goes back for some time now, has some excellence in flying that he's going to share with us tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about the weather. We're going to talk about some of the operations so that we can know better how to judge weather before we even leave the ground. We're going to talk a little bit about the USHPA.org US League that he is working on. We're going to talk about that tonight, and we're also going to open up for questions. This is a cross-country themed show, if you will. We're also joined by Tony Boyer. He is, along with myself, wanting soon, if the weather will permit, to do some cross-country flying here in Southern California. And so welcome to the show. So glad that you're all here. If you haven't checked out the website, go to paraglidingtalk.com. You can check out the future shows, and you can check out all the previous shows, and you can learn something. And I do want to encourage you ahead of everything, fly safe, do your due diligence, learn everything that you possibly can. This is aviation, and it's important that you fly safe all the time. So anyways, I'm really glad that you're here tonight. I'm excited about this show. We're going to have a great time tonight. I do want to start off the show, first of all, to saying thanks to all the patrons who have been supporting the show. We're going to keep this thing rolling. I'm having a great time with it. I appreciate all the guys that have been supporting and just hanging out. You know, it's paragliding talk. We're not, nobody's come to. We're all just a bunch of dudes that want to talk about paragliding. And so I love it. So welcome. I can see the chat's already starting to move. Just before the show started, by the way, I just want to say something funny. Mark Honeycutt called in, and he messaged into the comments, and he said, hey, video chat me. And I messaged him, and he was literally in the air flying, and he was on the he would have been on the show, but it's dark there now. So it was super funny to see him flying around. So we're going to try to put something together where we have him on the show, but he's going to be in the air while he does it. Don't try this at home, kids. Okay, so Revis, so glad that you're here. Let's talk first. I want to just start from the beginning. How did you get into the sport, and what drove you to jump off of perfectly good mountains?
Well, I got into aviation as a kid. I was 12 or 13 when I took a ride in a Cessna for the first time, and just immediately knew that I needed to fly. So I ended up doing some lessons in sailplanes early on, and then actually getting my private pilot's license right around when I was 18 years old, finishing high school. And then kind of gave up the airplane flying because it was too expensive, and I was busy with college. And my senior year of college, a good friend of mine kept telling me about paragliding. Daniel Barquet, he kept saying, oh, you've got to try paragliding. It's amazing. Come to Santa Barbara and check it out. And at the time, I was a broke college student, didn't have any extra time or money to take on something like that. And that's what I told him. Then a few years later, I'd sort of gotten into a contract software development career that did give me some time and money. And I did a tandem skydive. And the free fall experience was amazing, but clearly it wasn't for me in the way it is for skydivers. I didn't want to just spiral down and get in the plane to jump again. I wanted to fly the parachute the rest of the day. And light bulb moment, oh, I need to learn a paraglide. And basically that was it. I think it took me a few months before I took my first lesson, but I immediately just went all in and became completely obsessed.
That's how it goes.
Yep.
It starts off with just a glance at a YouTube video, and before you know it, you're completely hooked, spending all your money.
Yep, all your money, all your time.
So you were on Gavin McClurg's podcast, Cloud-Based Mayhem. If you guys don't know, what cloud-based mayhem is, you need to check that out. It's more geared towards the free flight aspect of the sport, but it has some excellent things that you can learn from all aspects. He's interviewed guys that have done big paramotor adventures. He's got, I mean, just a list of people. And so really encourage you to go check out Cloud-Based Mayhem. And I put a link to his interview. And it was funny when I reached out to Revis to have him on the show. We did like a pre-show, and when he logged on, I heard his voice, and I'm like, wait a second, I've heard this guy. And so I went back and checked out the show, and sure enough, I had already listened to that show. So I feel like I'm with among the great, and along with Tony Boyer too. Tony Boyer.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. And yeah, I guess we'll try and cover some slightly different topics on this show, so that we're not doubling up, and people can go give that a listen.
Yep.
To get information about mainly weather resources and technology, airband radios, ham radios, that kind of stuff.
Yes. So
it was a geeky show.
What's that?
It was a tech geek show.
Oh yeah, but I liked it. I did like it. So I'll mention something that they did talk about that I thought was super cool, is that you will fly with an airband radio where you're communicating with air traffic controller. And so if you're in airspace, you can do more, in my opinion. You obviously have to obey all the airspace rules, FAR 103 being ultralight. And so to be able to communicate with a tower or with that's great. And so what are some of the benefits of being able to do that, by the way?
Well, I actually haven't used it to fly into controlled airspace yet. I figure that'll happen at some point. Your local site, Little Black, that would be amazing. When you get up to the edge of that Ramona airspace, just call the tower and ask if they'll let you transition through. And if they do, that makes your choices about where to go a lot easier.
Right.
So I mainly use it for checking real-time surface weather conditions at airports. And then in Southern California, I do talk to the approach controllers anytime we're getting up very high and have them tell the jets to keep an eye out for us, basically. Especially at Marshall, there's a huge amount of jet traffic coming in right over the flying site. So
been seeing a lot of that lately too, haven't we?
Big for safety.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've used it down in the San Diego sites too. Not as much, just because the approach paths don't line up quite as perfectly with the flying side as at Marshall. At Marshall, it's really a big deal.
Yeah. That's where I got my P2. I loved flying there, and I can't wait to go back. Now that I've got a little more time under my belt, because at that time it was like the biggest flying I'd ever done, and it was just for the glass off. It was a 22-minute sled ride, So yeah, we've had a couple flybys. Check this out, Tony. Revis came down here just on a whim to fly, and he picked Little Black and held the site record for a little while from Little Black.
Yeah. Tell me about that a little bit. I'm kind of curious to hear about that. So
yeah.
Let's see. I was actually down in the area for a few days for a family thing. And so my dad offered to drive retrieve that day to go cross country flying. And
wow,
Little Black looked like the best choice, even though it's kind of hard to get away from there with the Bravo airspace, the Ramona Delta airspace, and those first couple of transitions are kind of difficult. But I'd looked at a lot of the XC lines through the area. So once I managed to get around the Ramona airspace, I kind of had a pretty good idea of what was up ahead, and flew right over Big Black and ended up almost to like between Lake Henshaw and Ranchita.
Dang, nice. Yeah. Okay. When was that again?
It would have been, was that 2 years ago? 3 years ago, maybe?
Okay.
Probably 2 years ago. I don't remember exactly.
Chris Cote wasn't happy with that, so a couple days later he went and beat that record.
Yeah, that one didn't stand very long.
Yeah,
that's
man.
Great.
I wish I had that kind of dedication. Somebody breaks my record, if I ever had one, I'd be like, right on.
Whatever.
Nah, man, I'm fine with it. I think it's great. I just like watching it all unfold, and I've been kind of doing the flying thing for a long time, and got too many hobbies, so I don't have much of an attention span that kind of to go the distance. That's what I kind of put in place of saying I don't have the skills to do it. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
I just don't have time. That sounds a lot better.
So let's talk about the recent adventure. You and Matthew, is it Hines?
Henze.
Oh, Henze. Matthew Henze. You broke a record there in Oregon. You went over 180 miles, and you were in the air for over 9 hours. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Let's see. So a few of us on launch sort of talked about the idea of practicing team flying. It's something that I've been working on quite a bit for the last couple of years. A lot with Gavin Friedland in Southern California. My friend Thad is the one who kind of first got us started on the benefits and advantages of team flying, and sort of told us we should be practicing it more seriously. So on launch at Pine Mountain, Mitch Riley, Matt Henze, and I sort of had a little powwow and said, let's try to practice team flying today. It looks like a good day for it. We know that we're all on similar gliders, similar kind of skill level potentially. So if we want to do really big distances in the future, like what the Brazilians have been doing, setting world records by flying as sort of a cohesive organism or team, we need to practice and get it dialed. And so that was the plan from the start. And it would turn out to be a really nice day. Cloud base wasn't super high for this area, but it was the easiest time I'd ever had getting away from Pine Mountain, which is near Bend, Oregon. There are lots of pine mountains, but
yeah,
we're talking about the one in Central Oregon. And the first leg, I think maybe 20, 30 Ks, was almost just dolphin flying under clouds. We didn't really have to stop and turn to thermal much. But then there's a spot a little ways in where we kind of need to shift gears and slow down, and it got much trickier, and the lift wasn't as abundant. And Mitch had an issue with his radio, so he wasn't hearing us and we weren't hearing him, and that makes it harder to team fly if you can't communicate about what your plans are. And we took slightly different lines. Mitch and I both got pretty low, but unfortunately where he was, he didn't end up finding anything to climb out from. And I was in a different spot, and there was a bird circling, and another local pilot, Mike, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but Whalen, I think. And I worked together, and were able to get back up with Henze. And then for the rest of the day, we basically just stuck together. And anytime one of us was low, the other one would wait around. And cloud base gradually went up. We never had a ton of wind. A lot of times you look at setting records and figure it requires flying a lot of wind, to get those ground speeds to cover the distance you need. But this was the summer solstice, so we had a lot of hours to work with. And the team flying allowed us to make it through some tricky spots pretty quickly by working together to map out where the good parts of the climbs were, trying different lines, finding the good line from one cloud to the next. And then probably about 100 miles in, cloud base went up from 10,000 to more like 13,000, which gave us a little more to work with. And there still were some tough spots, especially when the sun started to get low. But at very late in the day, I don't know the exact time, but probably right around 8 o'clock p.m., we got one final climb all the way to cloud base, and then went on a 20 plus mile, maybe 25 mile final glide with the sun setting, and a little bit of kind of like magic air restitution, glass off sort of effect, where for a while I was just turning in zeros, drifting downwind. Then we landed right by a highway. And Mitch and Mike had organized retrieve with people who were driving for us and taken my truck and chased us all the way. So after we packed up, they were there in about 10 minutes. Then we had a nice 4.5, 5 hour drive back to launch.
That's what I was going to say. They made a day out of the retrieve by itself.
Yep. And we had just enough gas to get to Burns, which is the only place with a gas station anywhere nearby. So it all worked out perfectly.
Oh my word. That is awesome. Mitch was the first one to land out. And then after that, you said Mike?
There were a few others flying that day too that also landed out in that same area. I say probably 35 kilometers in, it got really tough and ate a bunch of people. And so they kind of shuttled people back to their cars, and then Mitch and Mike got in the truck for the long haul to come get us.
Here's the most important question. Was it a clean flight?
100% clean. Yep.
Nice.
Yeah. So
Dude, that's so rad.
No airspace to worry about. No Class A. We were only getting to 13.5. We were flying through a military operating area for part of the flight, and actually saw a jet out maneuvering, but no legal issues with that. And it's so sparsely populated out there. There really are not many airspace concerns.
wow. Would you load up on power bars and water for that? I mean, 9 hours in the air. That's a long time.
Yeah, if I ate all my in-flight snacks and drank all my water for sure.
Well, okay, this is a question everybody's going to want to know. What do you keep for your hidden snacks?
Usually I have a couple protein bars, maybe like a couple packs of nuts I can eat in flight. And I fly with about 1.5 liters of water, usually with some like an electrolyte tab in it that I can drink in flight. And then another 1.5 liters for hiking out in the harness. And then depending on what glider I'm flying, that day I was flying the Xeno, and I had about 5 more liters of water for ballast.
Okay.
Wow. That's a lot.
5 liters for ballast?
Dang.
And then at the end of the day, I dumped all of it to extend that final glide.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You're making it rain.
Yep. Actually, I dumped a lot of it even earlier. There was sort of one crux, this mountain range we had to get over before we got into the Alvord Desert, and we got stuck down low for a while there. And so I dumped quite a bit of ballast at that point to increases the chances of getting up and out of there.
Yeah.
Wow.
So let me just get this right. You have 1.5 liters for while you're in flight. Is that in like a Camelback type bag?
Yeah, it's in a Camelback in the harness, so I can just drink from it from the shoulder strap.
Okay, and then you have a separate 1.5 liters.
Yeah, basically I have a big 3-liter bag, and I fill that harness Camelback on launch, and I keep the other 1.5 liters in the back of the harness for landing out, hiking, that sort of stuff.
And then you said 5 liters on top of that for ballast. Yep. And that's all stowed in the back area of your harness?
The ballast goes in an underseat compartment on my harness.
Oh, okay.
And I have a hose that comes out the side I can use to dump it.
Okay. And
so yeah, where did that put you in the weight range with 5 extra liters of water there on that glider?
That puts me right at the top of the certified range. The glider goes to 125 kilos. I'd been told that it was actually designed to go to 120 and then ended up being certified to 125, but I feel like it flies quite well between 120 and 125, especially when it's strong conditions. That day, the air was pretty benign. Most of the thermals, well, some of the thermals were difficult to track. They were not necessarily very organized, but I don't recall any serious turbulence. Whereas some of the places I've flown recently, like Woodrat for the Applegate Open.
Oh, yeah.
The Owens Valley before that, there was a lot of turbulence, and being heavy on the glider felt a lot better to me in those kind of conditions.
Oh, yeah.
Did you fly at the Applegate this year?
I did, yeah.
How was it?
I had a great time. We flew 7 out of 7 task days. And I think all the tasks were very close to fully valid. And I had some of my best results in comp flying to date, with a 5th place task finish and 13th overall.
Okay.
So yeah, I had a great time.
You know Brad Ganuscio?
Yeah.
He put a post on there, and they were talking about that it was a little bit rough at times. Did you experience that?
Yeah, I've never had a week at Woodrat without some rough conditions.
I was going to say, Robert, you and I don't know what it's like to fly without turbulence unless we go to like Torrey Pines or whatever. The Southern California air is just always gnarly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not always. Actually, once in a while you get those nice glassy days in the middle of wintertime at a horse or whatever like that.
Blossom.
Yeah, so Southern California can be bad, though. 2 times I've come close to throwing my reserve, and both those times have been Southern California.
That doesn't surprise
Not
me.
the Owens, I'm talking Marshall.
Yeah,
really?
yeah, for sure. Marshall can get gnarly.
Palomar can get gnarly.
Yeah, welcome to it.
Welcome to Palomar.
Oh man, that's what they call that video out there. Just they meaning just the masses that have seen that video. People ask me, "Hey, have you seen Welcome to Palomar?" I'm like, "Oh, not only did I see it on the video, I saw it happen in person." That guy hates that inversion even worse than me.
Revis doesn't know, but I had a big collapse on my right side, and I'm still really new, but at that time I was extremely green, and I totally overreacted. You have seen it, okay? Gosh.
Yeah,
everybody's seen it.
7,000 or 7,500, and then sort of cascaded a little bit and went to spiral.
Yeah.
That was outstanding comedy that day.
It was pretty intense.
And for it, we thank you, Roberto.
You're all welcome for the free entertainment.
Good job recovering the glider back to flying condition and flying away from it.
Yeah, once I finally decided to put my hands up and let the wing fly, everything was fine.
That's usually the key.
Yeah. So maybe talk about, you mentioned a couple times where you were almost going to throw the reserve. How close were you, and what was the circumstances?
Both times were low, kind of near the terrain on what we call the back ridge at Marshall. And that's the main reason that they were almost reserve tosses, is I didn't have a whole lot of time to sort anything out. And the first one, I don't know how descriptive I should be about the place. We were basically like pushing along the back ridge to the east, and there was a little bit of east wind, but I hadn't necessarily keyed into that. I was kind of tired, not really feeling 100%. Had a few too many beers the night before and not enough sleep.
It's an average day for Robert.
Took a big frontal. There may have also been some trim issues with my glider. I was working on trimming it, and I think that the tips were trimmed a little fast. And so a combination of just being kind of having slow reaction times and potentially a trim issue with the glider, when it frontaled, I wasn't able to prevent the frontal, and then the tips sort of flew forward. Ooh. And touched in front.
Horseshoe.
Yeah, and it mostly recovered with a big cravat.
Oh yeah, those are fun.
And so I was sort of trying to fly the other side of the glider, and either sort of mishandled it or just it couldn't really fly without spiraling, and so stalled briefly. Recovered the stall. The cravat was much better. Looked around, and still had a few hundred feet before I should have basically, if it hadn't recovered at that point, that would have been reserve toss. Now the glider was flying, but still pretty badly cravated. And so I pointed out away from the hills, and was just looking at a canyon full of manzanita and trees.
Oh gosh.
Oh man.
And that hill. Oof.
Just out the cravat with the stabilo. And then just kind of tracked down this canyon going, please let me find a little bit of lift. I don't think I did any turns the whole glide out. And then eventually came out over the Arrowhead Resort, which is right in front of Arrowhead Mountain, and skimmed my way all around the front of Arrowhead Mountain, and came in over the ridge and found a thermal and climbed back up and kept going XC.
Oh, nice. What glider was that on? Was that a Xeno also?
No, that was the Mantra 6. So Ozone 3-liner.
Yep. I know that glider. Mm-hmm.
But I figured if the adrenaline was flowing, my heart was pounding. But once I found that climb, I was like, if I can get up and back in the game here, I think probably the best thing to do is just keep flying and get back on the horse. Never really fall off, even, I guess. So that, like I said, that was when the stall recovered. That would have been a reserve toss if the glider were not flying cleanly at that point. The other one was similar area on the back ridge at Marshall. It's what they call Billboard.
So 2 times at Marshall.
Yep.
Gosh.
And that one, I was coming in from a valley crossing from Pine Mountain. low, very close to the terrain, and probably took a 70% asymmetric, and it's turned me some. Let's see, actually, don't even have a super clear memory of exactly how it went. But the glider reopened right away, and I was able to fly away from the terrain and get out into clean air. But basically, if that collapse had involved anything more than just like a quick pump of the brake, it reopening spontaneously, that also would have been a reserve toss, just because there was no altitude to do anything to work on it at all.
Whew. Yeah, the low ones are the scary ones.
Exactly. Yeah, I've had plenty of other collapses, in relatively large events, but they've all been far enough away from the terrain. I had time to sort it out without even thinking about the reserve.
Yeah, that's man.
It makes me want to stick to mountain biking.
Tony recently had a flight at Blossom, and he called me afterwards. I was like, "How was it, man?" Because I couldn't do it, and he was like, "It was so bumpy and so ratty. I quit 5 times."
Yeah, that was really nasty. That, in my defense, I mean, I'm kind of a wuss when it comes to my bump tolerance and pretty much paragliding in general. I never was able to turn off my hang gliding brain. But anyway, long and short of it was the weather prediction that day was supposed to be really, really nice, and really nice strong thermals and really light winds. And well, that was half right. So we had really strong thermals, and then like a 20+ mile an hour air mass came in and started just blasting everybody, including me. I mean, people were just getting smacked around the sky. Every single person that landed that day was like, "Man, I'm so happy to be on the ground right now," including me. Anyway.
So you made a statement, Revis, in Gavin McClurg's podcast that caught my attention, and you made the statement "flying with purpose." And so, what's the difference between flying with purpose and not flying with purpose?
I suppose that could mean different things to different people. For me, I basically, like these days, I basically consider every flight to be training in some way. I'm always trying to improve my skills. I'm always trying to learn. And so,
Let me ask you this real quick. How long have you been flying?
a little over 11 years at this point, paragliders.
11 years,
Yeah.
and you're still learning and practicing. Make that a note.
Yeah, I think that one of the main things I love about paragliding is I don't think I'm ever going to get to the top of that learning curve. I think that there's endless potential to get better and learn. It gets harder and harder the more you already know, I suppose. But the air mass is invisible for the most part. Our brains aren't really designed to fly, so there's a lot that you can learn. And if you look at a lot of the best pilots in the world, many of them are way older than you find in other sports, because you don't age out of it with your body the way you do in a lot of physical sports. And the more years of experience and training and practice that you can get under your belt, the more knowledge you'll have, and the better pilot you'll be, especially if those years of experience don't involve major trauma. I think that's one thing that sets people back significantly, is getting hurt.
Yeah. The cross country stuff, or the Red Bull X Alps, those guys are not young pups. How old's Kriegel? He's got to be what, 45, maybe less.
I don't know offhand.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I mean, Gavin is in his 40s. I'm being generous. I think he's closer to 50. He's maybe.
And I think Luca Zanini is at least in his mid-50s, and he's an amazing competition pilot.
Yeah, and running on the ground, hiking mountains, all that. So there's hope, Tony. There's hope for us, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking that. It reminds me of Ryan and Connor's dad on the
mountain bikes.
Oh my God, guy's 58 years old and he's just shredding. It's ridiculous. Gives me hope, man.
Yeah, there's
hope. You can shred on a mountain bike at 58. I'm hoping I can at least do half decent on a paraglider at 44. Come on.
I always try and tell junior pilots, don't rush your progression because you have time. I mean, even if you're middle aged starting, um,
Yeah.
you know, one bad injury can ruin your whole experience, and you know, you may never recover from it mentally or physically. Um, but if you take your time and try and always maintain safety margins and try and avoid those accidents, um, you're not going to age out of the sport like you do with most others. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
And
I love it.
also, back to flying with a purpose.
Yeah.
One thing that I think in the context I brought it up in the podcast with Gavin was flying in the cross country league, Northern California.
Yes.
So I think that flying competitions and tasks in sort of informal competitions is a great way for people that don't yet necessarily know enough to even know what to be training on, to start flying with a purpose. Instead of just boating around at your local site, it forces you to go places you wouldn't otherwise and see how other people approach that same challenge. And also just flying with other people in general is helpful because it gives you more visual indicators of what the air is doing. But I'd say the most straightforward and easy way to be flying with a purpose is to do some task flying, either in a cross-country league or, you know, category 2 competition, or maybe a more informal local kind of cross-country competition as well, where there isn't necessarily a task, but you're always trying to push yourself to go a little farther or do things you wouldn't necessarily do if you were just boating around at your local site.
That's great information. But that's exactly what we're after. Well, that's what I'm after. I try to drag Tony along. I force him a lot of times to fly because he always wants to run off and ride the mountain bike. But we're going to do some big cross country stuff very soon.
you mean like that massive one we did at Little Black?
Called Little Black.
Yeah. I think I tried XC twice. One time I landed at a Lowe's parking lot because I wound up in commercial airspace, and the other time I was unprepared, and the guy that I was following ended up bombing out, and I'm like, yeah, I'll go ahead and keep on going. And the second time I tried to fly XC, it was kind of the same story. I wound up rocking solo, and I'm like, yeah, here we go again. And so anyway, long and the short of that is I need to do a lot more studying of routes and airspace and that kind of a thing.
Yeah, we're gonna have to look at your line.
If you really have basically no XC experience, I would say one of the great places to get up to speed with that in Southern California is Marshall.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first steps are easy, and the sort of milk run XC flight takes you to Hangar 24 Brewery.
That's where I was trying to go. That first one I was talking about.
Yeah. So on pretty much any decent day, if you make the right moves, that's an achievable goal, even on a B glider for somebody without much experience. So it's a great place to get your feet wet with XC flying.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I was headed, but it was I don't want to say it was terrible, but I mean, it was not a good day. It was a really, really, really hot, high pressure bullet thermals, a lot of sink kind of a day. It was a great practice day. Because the guy I was following that day, he was like, "Yeah, best of luck, buddy," and he went and landed at a school somewhere. And then I was like, "Yeah, I think it's over here, I guess." And I tried to get over there, and that didn't happen.
So let's talk a little bit about what you're looking for before you leave the house, and then what are you looking for when you're standing on launch as far as weather goes.
So before I leave the house, which for me as a trailer varies a lot by where I'm parked. Because
I love it.
Different flying sites have sort of drastically different weather patterns that make for good cross-country flying. So what I'm looking for is pretty much always good cross-country conditions. Occasionally I'll go out for a glass off for sight flying, but I have a hard enough time motivating myself to work with just taking days for cross country that I normally will skip days that don't look like they have much cross country potential. So one of the key things is always going to be wind. The wind direction at the launch you're planning on using, the wind direction and speed at altitude, and how both those things change throughout the day. Like I say, there's not a specific general formula. It depends a lot on the specific site that you're flying. Usually light winds are pretty good. Some places, especially in the flatlands, and if you want to go big distances, you might be looking for a little more wind to help cover the distance, increase the ground speeds. In bigger mountains, generally lighter winds.
What's the first website that you go to look at?
So for each place that I sort of post up in my trailer and spend some time, I put together a folder of bookmarks for that site. Almost always the first thing I look at is what's called the area forecast discussion. So the
forecast discussion.
National Weather Service has local offices, and each one of those local offices will put out a text forecast discussion, usually twice a day. Sometimes they'll update it more if there's a specific reason to. So like here's a link. I don't know if this goes out to everybody or just you in the chat, group chat.
I can drop it in the main chat.
But that's the one for the local area here where I'm up in Bend, Oregon right now. And it'll be a description of sort of all the relevant mesoscale weather. They'll talk about pressure systems, troughs, fronts, and then they'll tend to touch on whatever is important to the people in that area. So they'll usually mention temperatures, if it's getting warmer or cooler, if there might be fire weather or hail or thunderstorms or sort of anything of note. And then kind of a general outlook for what's going on in the atmosphere right now and what it's going to be doing over the next couple of days. It's a little hard to read if you have no meteorology experience. But I started, not having, well, I'd studied a little bit of meteorology to get my private pilot's license back in like high school days. And then a tiny bit of meteorology learning to paraglide, actually during the paragliding training process. And I basically just started reading the area forecast discussion every day and looking up the things I didn't understand. And usually you can get it in a couple different formats, but usually sort of specific terms of art or like weird acronyms are hyperlinked to a glossary. So right away, if you see a term you don't understand, you can often just click on it and get the National Weather Service's definition of that term. Sometimes that's still not going to really get you to a point of understanding what they're talking about.
Just Google it.
But Google it. You'll find like online college courses in meteorology that'll cover some of these topics. And you can also, as long as you have the dedication to keep going back and reading it, even if you kind of gloss over stuff that you don't understand, eventually you'll get there just by seeing the same things come up again and again.
Yep.
Especially for flying days when they're talking about certain things happening, and then you go out and you actually feel the air that day. You'll get a better understanding of like what it means for there to be a trough, or how it might influence the wind, how it's going to change the nature of thermals, those sorts of things. So I would suggest anybody who wants to get better at weather forecasting, just start reading that every day, and especially every day you're going flying. But even days that you're not, if you're looking out the window of an office or running errands in your car or something, you still will start to develop a better sense of what's going on in the atmosphere if you've read that in the morning and then are looking outside and sort of seeing how the day progresses.
You're standing on launch. You've already read the report. Some things were questionable, but you said, it's probably flyable. I've done this before. What are you looking for in that to stay safe and keep your your other flying partners safe? And have you ever been in a situation where you've said, okay, you know what, this looks sketchy, I'm going to hike back down, sorry guys, and maybe talk about that a little bit?
Once again, it's going to depend a lot on the specific site that you're you're hoping to fly. Try to think of some good examples. So in Southern California recently, I've done a lot of lee side flying. A lot of the good days this spring, it was blowing north. And that's a tricky thing to analyze and predict on launch, because if the north pushes in harder, it may cause a lot of turbulence in rotor. It may make it unsafe. But if the north flow coming over the mountains and then sort of the LA basin prevailing south flow meet, it could create a really nice convergence and give you great flying conditions. So I always like to be on launch a while before I'm hoping to launch the paraglider.
An hour?
So I have some time. An
2 hours?
An hour is great. If it's me and people are, especially if there's a question about the conditions and people are wanting to sit at the bottom of the mountain and look at things, I would almost always rather be on top of the mountain watching things develop from up there.
Even if it involves hiking?
I don't do a whole lot of hiking, but basically, yes.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, I had one day where I hiked the 1100 at Mars. So that was not this season. I think it was last season. And when I got to launch, there was a rain cell moving in, and I pulled the tarp out of my bag and threw it over myself and my glider and waited for that cell to dump on us for, I don't know, 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and then hike down.
Oh, dang it.
So, but yeah, definitely driving up. If I think there's much chance of flying, I would rather be watching the conditions on top of the mountain, even if that means potentially sitting around up there for a couple hours. An hour before launching, I think, is generally a pretty good window. And the main thing I'm going to be looking at generally is what's the prevailing wind doing? Is there base wind? Are there thermal cycles? If there are cycles, what are they doing to the base wind? Are they amplifying it? How strong are the peaks? How long do the cycles last? What are birds doing? It's always great to have birds flying near launch.
Yeah.
They really will show you if the thermals are working at all, if they're strong. If there's wind drift, sometimes they'll show you shear layers, or wind that's doing something different up higher if you watch their track and watch what direction they're pointing when they're moving slowly in their thermal turns. And then the other main thing besides wind and thermic wind gusts is generally going to be cloud development or cloud cover. So some sites you need to be very concerned about overdevelopment and thunderstorms.
Marshall.
Yeah, it depends on the time of
Palomar.
year. I actually haven't seen a whole lot of that in Southern California because I'm not usually around in the summer and late fall, or summer and early fall. But a lot of sites in the Rocky Mountains, anywhere where there's a monsoon effect, that tends to be an issue. And so I'll try and look out towards the horizon and see how tall the clouds are getting. What you want is cumulus cloud development is almost always a good thing, but you want the clouds to be capped. You don't want them to get too tall. Right. And a good rule of thumb is if you see clouds that are taller than they are wide, that's probably not going a good direction. If you see clouds that are taller than they are wide at 10 in the morning, 10:30 in the morning, there's probably a good chance it's going to overdevelop later in the day, unless you're expecting the air mass to stabilize, like there's a ridge building or dry air moving in. Another thing to look at in clouds is what may be coming in the mid or high levels in terms of cirrus stratus, the kind of clouds that are going to shade the ground and cut down the surface heating. Many days I've sat on launch and watched other pilots one after the next launch right before a big shade band is coming and then sink out. And sometimes it takes waiting half an hour, sometimes it takes waiting longer. But if you time your launch right on days like that where there's this intermittent shading, and you get a nice sun patch, sometimes that'll let you get up and away from the terrain enough to have a good flight. Whereas if you mistime it, you're just taking a sled ride to the LZ because there's no heating.
I've experienced that.
Yep. The interesting thing is also sometimes on those days with shading, a lot of shade doesn't necessarily cut down the thermal production. That's something I have struggled with predicting. Some days shade moves in and you can just immediately feel the thermal shutdown. And other days shade moves in and it's still working or still kind of working.
Yeah.
The first task of the Applegate Open this year, we had extensive high cloud cover, like thick cirrostratus for a lot of the day. And then there were still cumulus clouds popping down underneath. Even when it looked completely shaded, there is enough destabilizing of the atmosphere that tiny little bit of sun that was filtering through was still making things work.
Wow.
I would not have been able to predict that from launch.
Right. We've done the same thing at Blossom a few times where I'm looking at the report and then I'm the chief engineer of a high rise and my building's 460 feet tall. So what I'll do is I'll ride the elevator up, go look out the window and I'll check and see what the conditions look like at Blossom. I can see it from the top of the building. And then, if I see that high clouds, usually I'll call Tony and I'll be like, I don't know, man. But we have gone out there where it was really nice and buoyant and fun and made a couple trips to El Cap and back on those days. So I know exactly what you're talking about. But I also have experienced the same where it shuts it off and you're like, okay, that was the end of that. And hike back down. And
usually it does reduce, pretty much anytime there's high cloud, it reduces the amount of energy available to the day. So unless it's a day that might overdevelop, you're better off not having the high clouds. So a lot of times I'll skip flying on days where I think there's going to be a lot of shading, even if maybe it would still work, just because it's not going to work as well as it would if there were full sun. You're not going to have the full potential of that day.
So you'll check out the area forecast discussion ahead of flying, and that kind of gives you a couple days worth of ideas. Are you familiar with the soaring predictor?
Yeah, in Southern California, I use the soaring predictor. Once again, I have a folder full of bookmarks I try and check every day, and I have the RASP map view from the soaring predictor and wind grams in those bookmarks, and I look at them every day.
Love those.
And the RASP does a great job with predicting convergence and predicting eddies. And once again, in Southern California, understanding eddies is really important for places like Marshall. And let's see how much to get into this, but
yeah, I'm totally interested.
So, for instance, we'll get these Santa Ana days where it's blowing north, and Marshall might be completely unflyable. If you go to the peak of Marshall, it might be blowing 20 miles an hour from the north over the back.
Right.
Turbulent, rowdy, wrong direction. Just no good would come of trying to launch there. And it's near the Cajon Pass. So you have air flowing down from the Mojave Desert into the LA Basin through the Cajon Pass. Typically, on those high pressure downslope days, you'll also have air flowing east to west through the Banning Pass, like from Palm Springs into Banning, Beaumont, that area.
Yep.
And then you have the San Bernardino mountain range in between these two passes. And basically, the air flowing down through the two passes will kind of wrap and form an eddy, this stagnation zone in the middle of the range, where it's actually blowing south on the surface. And sometimes it's blowing south up to 5, 7, 10,000 feet. And so on days where it could be completely unflyable at Marshall, you can go, I think it's like 20 miles, maybe less, to the east and fly a site called Mentone by the Seven Oaks Dam, where it's in the eddy and you don't get any of that north wind.
Interesting.
It can be unpredictable, though. We're just kind of trying to explore the edges of it to figure out how big it is, to figure out how high it goes, to figure out why it's different on different days. But the soaring predictor usually does a pretty good job of like drawing those eddies out on the map when you look at the surface winds and the boundary layer average wind
Right.
layers.
Interesting. Okay. That's pretty cool.
It's
So you're just
not a sure thing though. So far I
Yeah.
haven't had a bad one there, but Gavin Friedland had I think a few hours of nice flying at Mentone one day, and then looked down. There's this big flag by the LZ, and it's showing strong north. And he ran downwind out to Hangar 24, and landed basically with 0 ground speed, or maybe even going backwards, because the north had just sort of pushed through. You know, the eddy had kind of broken down. So it's definitely something that's difficult to predict and has some danger involved.
Sure.
But just understanding how the air can wrap like that can be important on days where it's not blowing from the north too. Like a lot of times we'll sort of get up close to the passes flying Marshall, the Cajon Pass, more so than the Banning. And the wind direction will change the closer you get, and the wind speed will change. Sometimes the wind can change like almost 180 degrees within just a few kilometers, because it's coming around the mountains and up into the pass.
Right. That's incredible to when you start thinking about well, Tony and I will talk about flying in Laguna every once in a while, and we're always like, you know, that's big boy flying. Like there's no games to be played in the Santa Anas.
Robert, yeah, say that again, man. I kind of lost connection. I don't know if anybody else did, but I lost connection when you were kind of explaining that. So explain that one more time.
I just said that Tony and I will, on a regular basis, talk about flying Laguna, but we typically, you know, that's big boy flying. We don't joke around about it lightly. Like, but eventually we're going to want to do that flying. But that's Santa Ana. I'm sure you're familiar with that flying site.
Yeah, actually, I've never even thought about flying Laguna Santa Ana, but you know, typically you get there, you know, at 10:30 in the morning, something like that, and you wait for the convergence to come through. You launch in the east, and then the west kind of comes in, the convergence sets up, and you get up and you go away. I tried it once in my hang glider about, I don't know, 18 years ago maybe, and I wound up missing it and ended up in the LZ below and ended up surfing that afternoon. But what do you call it? Again, it's that attention span thing. And you're right, though. I mean, it's a big boy flying site for sure. But I think it was Cote or maybe Phil Wessinger, one of those guys. He's like, you know, I mean, it's big boy flying, what have you, but it's convergence flying. And, you know, once you launch, you get in the air, you get in the convergence, and you go away. It doesn't matter if you launched at, you know, Torrey Pines or Laguna. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're leaving, and you're off on an XC that, you know, say you launched from a horse or something like that. You're still going to be in the same kind of.
Right. I want to do that, by the way. I want to launch at Horse and fly to Laguna, and then when it gets done, come back and land at Horse again.
Well, dude, we almost did that. I mean, that's actually not that far away, obviously, right?
No, it's not.
But that remember that day in December? It was like a 10,000-foot day or whatever it was. It was really super nice, and the air was really, you know, there was some couple of bumps here and there, but for the most part, for Horse, Laguna, that whole area was super, super mellow.
I was flying scared that day. That's why I didn't go very high.
Yeah, you didn't. Yeah, that was weird because I didn't even crack 10 grand or whatever, but I remember thinking,
So
I'm like,
close.
man, I felt like I was all dressed up with nowhere to go because there was no retrieve drivers that day.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing this.
Perfect day to fly Laguna and then back to Horse.
What's that?
It'd be a perfect day to fly back to Horse then.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what ended up happening. I ended up tracking a thermal way far back, and I'm like, hey, this Laguna's right there. And I'm like, where's Horse, though? I'm like, oh, yeah, it's way back that way. I mean, it was.
There was a handful of guys that were getting on radio, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody was like, so I'm thinking about going cross country. Is anybody interested in doing a retrieve? And everybody was like in the air. We're like, no.
Crickets, man. And nobody was doing retrieve that day.
I think I turned my radio off after that. I'm like, no way.
Yeah, that was so funny.
I was taking some gnarly thermals up, and then I would just wing over down and then do it again. And I just kept doing it over and over again because I had that was like the weekend after my Welcome to Palomar experience. So I was still wigged out.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
So it just dawned on me that Clark Kent is Randy.
Oh, nice.
I did not realize that until I saw his comment that he flew Laguna in the hang glider every weekend in the summer in the late 80s.
Yeah.
And man, I used to fly hang gliders with Randy nearly 20 years ago, whatever it was. And yeah, he tore that place up. I wish he was live audio right now
I know we should put him on. I've tried to have him on, but he's a moderator, but I'm trying to lure him in.
Yeah, he's packed full of knowledge. You see that? What's the rotor when you cross over the escarpment coming from horse? Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
But anyway, yeah, I mean it's.
So you're an administrator, Revis, for the U.S. League. I want to segue into that and talk about that. We're almost out of time. I want to get that. I'm going to put a link in the description for that so you can participate. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so this sort of ties in with the whole flying with purpose thing. This is a relatively new competition format for the U.S. Other countries have been doing it for many years. But in addition to race to goal competition, we now have a cross-country competition. And the way it works is you just register for the league, submit your flights to X Contest, and your top 6 highest scoring flights of the season are added up for points, and you get a multiplier for out and return and a bigger multiplier for an FAI triangle. And then whoever has the most points within each
froze up on us.
And ends the end of September, and the new season starts at the beginning of October. So we're well into the 2018 season. But there's still a lot of good flying ahead of us. So if you're interested in sort of doing some competition with your XC flying, comparing yourself against your buddies, that sort of thing, there's still time to register and have 6 great flights before the fall comes around.
I put a link in the comments. I'm also going to put a link in the description for that. That's on the ushba.org page on /US League. And so they can sign up through that. Is that right?
Yeah, that should have all the info they need. My email is listed on that page, I believe. So if there are any questions, you can reach out to me directly. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. There's a $5 fee to cover the cost of scoring. And you just need, other than that, you just need to have an account on X Contest. Okay.
And what are you guys using to monitor your tracks? Does it matter?
There are some requirements about what kind of track log you need to record. I don't know that offhand. It's all listed in the rules, but basically, if you have a flight instrument that can produce an IGC track log, it probably is sufficient. I know that both XC Track and XC Soar Android apps work. So do most, like a Flymaster GPS Vario would work just fine. There are a lot of options. Probably unlikely that your track wouldn't work. But you can always make an account on X Contest and try uploading one before you sign up for the US League. And if your flight instrument doesn't work,
you'll know.
You'll know, yeah.
Excellent.
So yeah, what's it? Got a question here.
Yeah, I saw a couple questions. Yeah. Let's open up for questions and comments for Revis if you have anything that you want to add to the show.
We have one here, and I just lost it on a chat, but it was essentially it's from David. He's said that
Revis knows his weather.
Revis is a weather knowledge expert. Yeah. What about some videos? You have any videos on weather predictions there, Revis?
Let's see. I have a DVD series that I've watched. See if I can pull up details on that. It's, I don't know, it takes a certain attitude to be able to enjoy it. It's by a UCLA professor, but he makes really cheesy weather jokes. If you can just sort of like
Choosing the better man.
Yeah, if you can figure out how to enjoy that, there's a lot of good information in there. It's definitely not for everybody, though.
It would definitely be for me, without question.
If they can handle this show, they can handle that for sure.
Absolutely.
I'm
not seeing it right now, but I can. If there's a way to add to the description or show notes in the video after the fact, we can put a link in there to that.
Yeah, for sure.
There probably is a lot on YouTube these days. I haven't really done much poking around. Most of the weather resources I've learned from online have been like freely available lecture notes and slides from college courses. Once again, I don't have those links handy.
You're talking about courses on aviation or weather?
No, like meteorology.
Okay.
Just basic college meteorology courses.
That's excellent. You still fly every once in a while? Like private stuff, private plane
Airplanes?
stuff? Yeah.
No, I haven't in a while. My ratings expired, so I would need to get a biennial flight review and a new medical certificate to be current. But if anybody has a plane and wants to go flying, I make a great co-pilot.
Nice. There's a handful of pilots in the chat even right now.
Oh yeah, that's true. There's a lot of private pilots.
Still love airplanes. Just doesn't really fit into my budget these days.
Yeah, welcome to the rest of us. But what about let's see here. Oh, this guy had a pretty good question here. Reserve shoot and choice. Reserve shoot of choice and your setup. And do you use 5, 6, 7, 8?
Yeah. Okay. So I currently only have one reserve, and it's the one I bought when I started. It's a Lara 250. So really more of like a hang gliding style PDA. I'm probably due for a new one, and I got a harness recently that has an option for a factory front mount. So I would really like to be flying with 2 reserves since I'm on a 2-liner. I don't yet have specific ones picked out. It seems like there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the squares these days. And Regalos certainly look interesting too, both for the quick opening and the potential to throw high and put yourself in a better place. That's something I'm actively looking into. I definitely am not the best person to answer reserve questions since I have not had to throw mine yet. I assume it will happen at some point, but hasn't happened yet.
That's why we had Brad Ganuscio on.
Yep.
He threw his
He's
reserve.
seen a lot.
What did he say? 9 times, I think.
Oh yeah, he threw it twice in like a 3-day period in front of his house. But also I think I just decided to get a cutaway base. That's it. I'm doing it. I'm gonna get one tomorrow.
Sign up.
He's probably seen more throws than anybody else in this country, would be my guess, with all the SIV instruction.
Yeah, that's true.
Another question. I have not tried paramotoring. I've thought about it a little. Before I started living in a trailer, I was thinking about it more seriously. I was up in Northern California and was taking basically 3 months off a year from doing any kind of thermal, really any paragliding, and that was depressing me significantly.
Oh, yeah, man, serious.
So I thought it might have been nice to have a motor to just get some flights in the winter. I still am somewhat interested in it, but I have limited space for more toys like that, and I'm not necessarily enough of a gearhead to really enjoy all the. It sounds like they require quite a bit of maintenance and tinkering. So I get
on the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get more than enough energy and time and money spent maintaining just a truck and a motorcycle. So
right.
I would like to try flying a paramotor someday, though. It does seem like it'd be fun.
I'm pretty sure that everyone in the chat right now has a paramotor or flies paramotors.
Except for me.
Except for Tony and myself.
Yeah, we're kind of lame.
We got to make that change.
I don't know.
We just need someone to give us paramotors. That's the bottom line.
That right there. that is the key. Let's get that. What's that Patreon account of yours? Let's get that thing up here. Come on.
It's a good time to, yeah. That's a good time to segue into the begging part of our show where we beg you to give us money on the Patreon. No, seriously, support the show. Support the show financially at patreon.com/robertmichaels.com. Right on. Revis, I really appreciate you coming on, man. It's an honor when actually it was Phil Wessinger that said, hey, you should have Revis on. It would be a great show. And I was like, oh, I don't know of who you speak of. But then when I started digging, I'm like, oh man, he's got some records. He's got a whole bunch of years of experience. So I was like, oh man. And then when I found you on Cloud-Based Mayhem, I'm like, oh, he's an all-star. It's on. So I really appreciate you coming on, man, and really a hero in the sport in my world and many others I know. And so this is going on the internet forever. What a great show. Really appreciate the everybody coming to watch and the questions and comments. Unless you guys have anything else that you want to ask or add to the show, we'll call this a wrap. We'll just have a short after show. Other than that, really appreciate everybody. Go to paraglidingtalk.com. Check out the upcoming shows. I got some great shows. I just lined up 2 more. And it looks like we'll have a Mark Honeycutt show coming very soon. I don't have an official date for that one yet, but I also got the Resurgence PPG is going to come on. Todd is going to join us. I believe that's next week. Next week's going to be Shreddy Eddie. And then following it'll be Resurgence PPG. And then after that, we're going to do a speed flying show with David. I think it's Hebert, and that's going to be a great show. He teaches and flies at Saboba. He was a Red Bull guy, and that's going to be a great time. And I think there needs to be more talk about the speed flying aspect. And so, anyways, thanks again for coming on. Revis, thank you so much. Tony, thanks for moderating, and we'll call this wrap, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks for having me.
Right on, right on.
All right. Talk to you guys later. And yeah, don't forget to click the thumbs up button. Thanks, Glenn, man. You're the man.